Hi. It's been a while. But that's okay. That's okay. I'm here now, and I'm here to talk to you about a game that came out in the last few weeks now. Dating this. Last few weeks now, that's Resident Evil 6, and I got to play through Resident Evil 6. And first, to kind of set up the where I'm coming from, I'm actually a pretty big Resident Evil fan, and the fact that I have all the Resident Evils on GameCube show that I'm a GameCube Resident Evil. I'm a GameCube fanboy as well. But I have like Resident Evil 0. Resident Evil 0 is great. Resident Evil 1, I thought that was amazing. On the remake, I haven't played the original, unfortunately. I should get to that eventually. And I might get the DS version for the touchscreen controls. For dumb touchscreen controls. Resident Evil 2 is probably my favorite. 3 is eh. And then we have Code Veronica, which is pretty good. And then, yeah. And then I also have Resident Evil 4. And Resident Evil 4 really was kind of a turning point in the series for me. Because, well, I think it's obvious. I mean, Resident Evil 4 is the game that really changed how the Resident Evil franchise would, be considered as a game. I would say Resident Evil 4 is not even really a Resident Evil game. A lot of people say Resident Evil has lost its original charm, and a lot of people say that Resident Evil 4 keeps that charm, and I don't think it does so much. I think it keeps the cheesy dialogue and the really over-the-top characters, I guess you could say. But I think as a gameplay perspective, like in the atmosphere of the game and just the setting, I don't think Resident Evil 4 lives up to the Resident Evil name at all. And so that's kind of where the series kind of went off for me. Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 4 is an amazing game. It's the best game probably out of all of them. Just not a very good Resident Evil game, in my opinion. And then we got Resident Evil 5, which was just not as good Resident Evil 4. More actiony. And I played Resident Evil 5, and I actually don't even own a copy, because I never felt the need to get one, because I just didn't really like it that much. And then so going into Resident Evil 6, I didn't really have the high of expectations, because, I mean, all the cutscenes and stuff were, explosions running, blah, 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 or the trailers, pardon me. But I found myself to be kind of impressed by Resident Evil 6 for what it was. And yeah, you can go online and you can find tons of reviews, completely everywhere. I think the low end is like 2s and 3s, and then you have the high end, which I think the highest review I saw was 8.8 on Game Trailers. I didn't look to see if there was any higher than that actually, but I mean that's still a huge gap. But as different as people kind of perceived the game, I guess. One thing that I think was really prevalent, even if you didn't like the game, is just how really noticeable, I guess, even if you didn't like the game, is how ambitious the game was. Because the game is essentially split into 4 campaigns, and 4 campaigns is a big deal to some extent, but a lot of games, they'll rehash a lot of content. The thing is that Resident Evil 6 feels like probably like 3.5 different games, because it uses the same engine, same mechanics, everything, obviously, but what really makes it stand out is just like the subtle tweaks they do to make the game feel completely different, depending on the campaign you play. And one thing I would say first is that if you like Resident Evil 4, at least rent Resident Evil 6, because Leon's campaign is pretty good. It's pretty much Resident Evil 4, not as great, not as polished, but it's pretty much Resident Evil 4. And Dead Space fans might like it, unless they don't like the Resident Evil lore kind of thing. Cheesy people pointing guns at each other, guns at zombies. But so you have Leon's part, which is pretty like Resident Evil 4, much slower game. You actually fight zombies with Leon's section, and they're faster than the Resident Evil 4 zombies, but they're still slow enough that you would say, okay, these guys, they're zombies. You can't say that about a lot of zombies these days. Unfortunately, they're a little fast, but at the same time they also kind of just lumber around a bit. But then you have something like Chris's campaign, which they just all they do is change one enemy, or change the zombies to the Huavos, which are like basically humans, um, who can use guns, use cannons, drive cars, all that good stuff. Um, well, I want to say good stuff. Honestly, the whole thing with Chris's campaign is that it pretty much, because they're they're pretty much humans, it makes it pretty much a generic shooter, with the slight twist that when you shoot zombies in specific body places, they transform and they get special abilities, and it's like, well, this is dumb because I gotta load a bunch of bullets into them and hope they die. Um, but yeah, I mean, when you're playing those games, they're two completely different experiences, despite being or using the same mechanics. It's just the pacing is just so different between the two, and then I guess you'd say the parameters of what the enemies can work with, are so different. And then you have Jake's part, which Jake's is really the last separate section. I'll get to the fourth section here in a second. And Jake, he borrows a lot from Chris, and he borrows a bit from Leon as well, although he mainly fights the Huavos as well. But I'd say Jake's part's almost like an Uncharted game. I haven't played Uncharted, so let me get this out of the way. I haven't played Uncharted, but it's what I would imagine an Uncharted game would feel like, with a lot of cinematic sequences, a lot of quick time events, a lot of, this witty dialogue going back and forth where, Chris and Leon, they have some of that Resident Evil dialogue, but they're kind of quiet. Jake's the chattermouth. Him and Sherry, they have a good time. So have a good buddy time together. And so Jake doesn't feel Resident Evil at all. Just put it out of the way. I mean, at least Leon, you have some of that slower paced nature of the original games that Resident Evil 4 did actually keep intact. But Jake is very fast paced. Not Resident Evil at all. But I think Jake's probably the second best part of the game. Chris's campaign is really boring. And then you have Ada Wong's campaign, which some people I've heard say is like its own fourth game, and that one's the most Resident Evil-ish out of them all. I think Ada Wong is simply alright. She has some stealth segments, and she actually does have some puzzles, which is kind of nice. But her section's alright. I don't think there's anything particularly stand out about it. So I'm not gonna really put much time into it. But the thing is that, the main three sections that, they advertise kind of thing, and, are open to you to start, all are very different. And it's really impressive, how different they were able to make all these sections just by doing these little tweaks here and there. And, they're not always for the good. Chris's is terrible, Leon's is pretty good, and then Jake's is pretty alright as well. But because they kind of made these like 4 different games, it's very inconsistent. And, these days in the industry, we have this very high bar set for polish. And when you don't sit there and just polish your game into a shine, you're not going to get that great feedback that, nearly every game seems to get these days. Where it's like 9 out of 10. Good game. Did everything the last year did, but best game of the year, I guess. I don't know. I don't really like the whole idea that polish is this ultimate factor of what decides between a 7 and a 10 kind of thing. And then, because how the industry works now, it's like if it's a 7, it's considered junk. But yeah, so it's really inconsistent, but the thing is, I guess, is that there's nothing particularly new in the game as well. I'd say that the game's almost kind of like a sampler. If you want to play a lot of different video game style, action game styles in one game, this game's kind of like, oh, let me taste a little bit of this, let me taste a little bit of this, let me taste a little bit of this. They kind of replicate these other games, but they don't particularly do them best. But I mean, you're getting all these styles in one $60 package, which I wouldn't say, buy $60. I want to say buy Resident Evil 6 at $60. But it's interesting. I would say that, as a sampler and, just, as a Resident Evil game, I think it's worth renting overall. I mean, it has a lot of interesting elements to it, and you can kind of see where the series is going to go from here. I think that they're probably going to Okay, I don't want to say I think. I'd hope they cut out Chris's section because that's clearly the weakest link here. And then I don't think Jake's particularly a bad thing considering what the series is going. At this point, I don't think the old school Resident Evil fans really expect much. I haven't got to play Revelations yet, so I can't really talk about Revelations. I heard it's pretty good, but at this point, I think on the home console side, Resident Evil fans aren't really going to expect much. So I think Jake is something that should be here to stay in terms of his gameplay style, as well as Leon. And I don't think having more action and having a more traditional Resident Evil 4 style experience, two different experiences, is a bad thing. Maybe we can go forward, going back to something like, the original Resident Evil, where we have two paths, Chris and that's not Chris, that's Jill. But Chris and Jill, on these separate paths, and then have this more action oriented side, then have this more atmospheric kind of slower paced zombie shooting game. So I guess this isn't really a review, but I would say if you had to ask me, Ben, what is Resident Evil 6's value? And I would be like, well, not Ben. I'd rent it. And then if you feel like, if you're someone who doesn't rent games, like I wish I could have not rented this and bought it, I'd say wait till it's like $30, because you're getting, overall it's pretty much an alright game, and it's not particularly doing anything new. Which I'm more willing to recommend something if it's doing something new and interesting. And while it's ambitious, there is other games do it just as well, and you can buy those. If you haven't played Uncharted and Gears of War and Resident Evil 4, you can find them dirt cheap. So you should play those instead, probably. Yep, video games. Yeah. We did it. I mean, you're talking off your cuff.